Today, I'm reviewing the Truthear X Crinacle Zero Blue 2 in-ear monitors. We're going to find out whether these are worth all the hype. Let's get it. What's cracking, audio fans? David here from Prime Audio Reviews. Shirui, I assume. A bit of a waifu going on there. Here's a sneak preview of the graph on the back. That's about the sum of the box. Inside are the usual suspects, the IEMs, of course, a little faux leather pouch, and your cable and ear tips. That's about it. So here's a look at the IEMs. They're probably not going to sit up. They look somewhat similar to the original Zero. They look very similar as well to the Zero Red, of course, different color obviously, but that's what they look like. Pretty sleek faceplate design there. The shells are pretty much the same, glossy black acrylic, but people will be glad to know that the nozzle size has been reduced, so for a lot of people these are going to be more comfortable than the red and the original blue. Let's have a look at this cable now, and it is a much welcome change from the original, and it's an upgrade over the one that came with the red and the Hexa. We're going to look at both of those later, but this cable is, much improved. It's thicker, it is smoother, it's much less prone to tangling, and overall it's just a big upgrade. Although for what's the price? $65. For a $65 IEM, it's okay. It is definitely a big upgrade, but still at the same time it's very generic and pretty ordinary. You also get with the IEMs this 5 ohm impedance adapter, and I'll talk about that a bit later on when we get to the sound, unless I forget. Right, hopefully you can get you can see what's going on there with the IEMs. Let's get into it. First of all, in terms of comfort, they're fine for me. I never really had that much of a problem with the reds. By the way, if you are looking for a comparison with the original blue, you need to look elsewhere because I've never tried it. I do have the red, I do have the Hexa, I do have the gate, but not the original Zero. So anyway, let's get into the sound. I will start off by saying that these require a bit more driving power than your average IEM. You will find yourself turning the volume up a bit more than you're used to, so I would recommend at least a dongle DAC or some kind of amplification, especially if you're going to use this adapter here. But spoiler alert, you probably don't want to use the adapter. Alright, so in terms of sound signature, it's kind of neutral with a sub-bass boost. It's a clear and spacious sound, which is a definite plus. It's got good instrument separation. Detail retrieval is definitely above average for something at this price point. We'll throw up the graph here and have a look at that. And nothing too unusual about that. You can see we've got a definite focus on the sub bass, and the mid bass is still there. It's still present as well, though less so than the sub bass, but you can see that rather significant dip in the lower mid range, and we'll come to that a little later on. I do want to talk about this impedance adapter before I forget. Basically what this does, it's a 5 ohm impedance adapter. This will increase the level of the bass quite significantly. It's like 4 or 5 decibels, which is pretty significant. But what I found is that it kind of takes things a little bit too far. It adds so much bass that it becomes rather detrimental to the overall presentation. So I'm just going to leave it at that. It's there if you need it. If you want bass, look, if I want heaps of bass, I'm going to buy a bass, heavy bass tuned IEM. Especially if you're using a dongle DAC with a phone, like you've already got the dongle hanging off your phone. You don't want to add this extra encumbrance to your rig as well. If you're on the go, that's just really goofy and uncomfortable. So let's come back to the stock tuning now, the bass tuning. Now, in terms of bass, the low end is, I would say it's a bit of a highlight on this IEM. The sub bass extension is genuinely very good. It reaches way down. It's got excellent sub bass depth, gives you a nice satisfying rumble when the track calls for it. As for the mid bass, it is nice and tight and punchy. It never gets muddy or overpowering, but at the same time, it's not one of those really impactful mid basses either. You can feel the impact here in the bass, especially in the subs, but those subs also create a kind of a dark undertone that is always present, much like it was on the Zero Red. And then in the mid-range, so the mid-range is where things get a little more nuanced, and while vocals are brought forward in the mix, like obviously it's a Crinacle IEM, he's going to have a focus on vocals, so vocals are forward in the mix. However, I found they really lack kind of any vibrancy that makes them shine. There's a bit of dryness to the overall mid-range presentation, particularly in the lower mids, and the notes in the lower mids feel a touch thin, so male vocals aren't very rich or saturated, and that goes for instruments as well, particularly string instruments. They sound a bit dry. It's kind of, you get more of the string than you do of the resonance of the body. It's like, it's a bit weird because the focus is there on the vocals, but the energy and the fullness in the mid-range, not always quite what you'd hope for. And ironically, despite the focus on vocals, I actually preferred using this IEM with instrumental music. Okay, now for the treble, and moving to the highs, the treble on the Zero Blue 2 is undeniably crisp and present. You get good clarity up top. However, similar to that mid-range, treble notes they kind of lack a bit of weight. They lack note weight, and additionally there is a noticeable sharpness and even some brittleness in the upper mid-range there. You can see on the graph where there is some pretty significant upper treble lift, and yeah, that's definitely noticeable. It brings a bit of sharpness. It can be a bit fatiguing, and it also sounds a little bit off in terms of timbre. But what I kind of noticed with this IEM is that parts of the frequency response sound kind of compressed. It's not really open, and it just lacks vibrancy and color and saturation. We'll do a couple of comparisons now, and I'll start with the Truthear Hexa here. The Hexa is coming in a little bit more expensive. It's about $80 US, or at least it was when I reviewed it. So the Hexa has, oh boy, I didn't even tell you what drivers we got in the Zero Blue 2. This is a dual dynamic driver IEM. So the Hexa, on the other hand, has got one dynamic driver and 3 balanced armatures. In terms of sound signature, it's a lot more linear than the Zero Blue 2, like it's not as up and downy, as peaky. It does have significantly less bass quantity, and at the same time it has less lift in that presence region, so that, 3 to 4 kilohertz region as well. So Hexa's sub bass is more restrained, but at the same time it is kind of more in line. It's a more linear transition between the sub bass and the mid bass, so it sounds a bit more even there. And on top of that, it transitions more evenly into the mid range. So the mids on the Hexa are actually more forward, and that gives male vocals and string instruments more fullness and body. The upper mid-range and the presence region, they are more subdued on the Hexa, yet despite that, the vocals still sound more dynamic and still more vibrant than they do on the Zero Blue 2. And I think that's mainly due to this sub bass focus. Like I said, that underlying tone of the sub bass, it just carries throughout everything. And in addition to that, the Hexa's upper treble has a more natural fall off, which results in a more natural timbre, less sharpness. And I think the Hexa has better instrument separation and a wider sound stage, but it has less depth in the stage. Right, next up, we're going to have a look at the Zero Red, and the Red here, it's another dual dynamic driver IEM, but in a nutshell, you could say that the Red is basically the Hexa, but with added sub bass. So the sub bass and the mid bass, they are quite similar on the graph on these two IEMs, and they're similar in weight and in impact. However, the Zero Red has more lower mid-range body and less again in the presence region. So it is kind of a more linear, smoother presentation. However, the Red also has more of a treble roll-off. It doesn't have that sort of extended upper treble that the Blue has, so it's a bit darker in tonality, which depending on how you look at things might be better or might be worse. So the Red is like a sub-bass and mid-range focused IEM with a rolled off treble. I think the tonality sounds more even compared to the Blue. It doesn't suffer from that edgy treble that the Blue has, but at the same time it sounds pretty bottom heavy, like that underlying sub bass just permeates the entire sound. It's a bit much, and I'm not against bass at all. I love bass, but I don't like when it's only sub bass and the mid bass is scooped out and the lower mids are somewhat hollow and lacking saturation. And finally, the Zero Red has a narrower soundstage and less detail retrieval than the Blue, but it has a less fatiguing sound signature. So where does that leave us with the Truthear X Crinacle Zero Blue 2? What a name. First of all, I'll throw these up for a second and I will say out of these three, the Hexa would be my pick. I'm not really a fan of either of these other ones. I didn't hear the original Zero, but you know, just speaking strictly of the Zero Blue 2 here, I'm not a fan. It has this weird compressed kind of sound. It has this sub-bass focus and a somewhat hollow lower mid-range. And on top of that, despite the focus on vocals, it just lacks vibrancy. There's something missing to my ears. It's very dry presentation throughout. Even the treble notes, they lack a bit of weight and they lack a bit of wetness. Now, having said that, I did enjoy these on certain instrumental tracks and music, but really I think for the price, it's a decent IEM. Depends what you're looking for. Would be good for gaming, I guess, strictly for gaming. But in terms of music, I wouldn't call this an all-rounder. I don't really enjoy it that much. I think for the money, there is definitely better options out there. You've got the, you know, the SimGot EA500LM. You've got the Kafine Delchis. For a bit more, you could splash out and buy the Hexa, which I think is a much better IEM overall. And yeah, so take that as you will. It's a decent IEM for sure, but definitely not worth the hype. And I think if you look around a bit, you can find better options. Anyway, having said that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, give it that thumbs up, Pa Family Audiophile style. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button before you go. And until next time, see you later.